All right. So, my talk is titled Cyber War and Violent Extremism. To be honest, I'm not a terrorism-specific expert. I've been learning a lot over the past few days.
Thank you.
Exactly. Now I'm a terrorism expert, but like last Sunday I was not. So, to give this is a brief history of my, I guess, curriculum vitae. To be completely honest, and perhaps a little more pertinent to our location, I wanted to go back even further than my time at the National Security Agency. When I was 13 and I was studying for my bar mitzvah, I was by far the worst language student that they had ever had. And that reflected very poorly upon me when I actually had to do the bar mitzvah. But at the same time, I was picking the lock to my stepfather's door, opening up his computer, dialing into BBSs, cracking computer games so I could play them, doing other various things with the computer that we will not discuss. But that stuff always came really easily to me, right? So as my career went forward, I ended up getting a scholarship from the National Security Agency, continued during my time there, which was an entertaining time as well, because I didn't necessarily fit in with the culture. Probably the most publicized story of myself is that I used to park in the director's parking spot every day. I had a beat-up old Toyota with a big Free Kevin sticker on it, obviously a hacker's car. And every morning, they would call me up, and he never came to our building, so I was like, what's the big deal? He never comes to our building. He's not here, and I am. So I was like, your motto was one team, one mission, and I'm like, this is one team, one parking lot. And they were very upset about that for a long time, but for that particular thing, they did not throw me off the base. So after that, I left the National Security Agency and joined one of the very first pure play startup consulting companies that does security consulting called At Stake. It was founded by members of the Loft, who are famous for having long hair and being generally annoying. Shortly after 9/11, I started my own firm, Immunity, which has a much cooler logo, as you can see, and was much cooler in every way, really. Immunity does much of the same thing. So it was doing assessments, it was doing consulting work, and also writing and selling programs that helped other people do the same thing. And Cyxtera continues that tradition. So Cyxtera bought Immunity, and I am now the Chief Security Technical Officer of Cyxtera. We own almost all the data centers that you've ever used, which means in some sense we are the cloud, although realistically we are power. We sell you power and space. And in addition to my work there, I also write and discuss policy for the United States. You can see some of my pieces in Lawfare, which is a preeminent blog discussing cyber policy, although I'm not a lawyer, as you all know. Someone asked me yesterday if I was a diplomat, and I'm like, definitely not. I've never been accused of that. And then cybersec politics, if you Google that real quick, you will find a blog that myself and a few others write about. It's not technical, it is policy related, but it is by technical people, because Lawfare doesn't like it when I say that you have to have a computer science degree to intelligently discuss policy in this area. So based on that, and based on our discussion over the past few days, cyber changes everything, but the way it changes is somewhat predictable. And that's, I think, part of the thing that is missing from a lot of policy discussion is any predictions, and hence any ability to make change and strategic decisions. And so if you have been paying attention, if you were old like I am, I'm like 43 right now, which in hacker ages, like we age like dogs, right? So it's like 107. But one of the early people thinking about what you now call social media was a NYU professor called Clay Shirky. And he wrote about how human beings organize themselves when given a set of features on any kind of website. This was back when like Google Plus might be a thing. And I'm gonna bring up this little picture here. And what we did at Cyxtera was we looked at getting a lot of data and how you handle that. And anytime you want to analyze one of these platforms, you have to build a certain type of pipeline. And that pipeline has data gathering, it has storage, it has search, It has natural language analysis. It has translation. All the things you have heard about earlier today if you attended the Red Alert talk, for example. And I will discuss why I think they are wrong about everything shortly. And the thing that makes this so difficult is that humans naturally correct for any kind of algorithmic censorship. And what we do as countries is we try to, in some way, control information. In so many ways, hacking is, I mean, it's the discipline of what I call iconography, right? So we iconoclasty, that's a different word. We in some ways try to avoid having the fantasies and assumptions that everyone else has. So if you think the buffer should be 255 characters, I will think the buffer should be bigger, right? That's basically my entire career, is making small buffers much bigger. And the same thing is true about cyber war. I'm not a specialist necessarily in terrorism, but I am a specialist in not following the assumptions of other people, which allows us to do asymmetric effects. So to your right, you will see an example of one of the Twitter messages that both Red Alert and many other projects are trying to analyze. And one of the great things about this particular message, if you have like the eyes of an eagle, is it's in Turkish. It's in Turkish with a comment, but it also has a picture. And then the picture's comment is also Turkish, and you have a very fuzzy picture of bin Laden. And then at the very bottom, it has like a parentheses, and it says, Sheikh Osama. I don't speak Turkish, so that was, who knows, that was just random, right? But any of these languages, I really speak nothing. But here's the thing that we learned through our analysis, is that many people talk about Osama bin Laden. That's super normal. But when you talk about Sheikh Osama, you are giving him this, a particular reverence. And that's what we can start having the automatic neural networks clue in on and be able to determine that, in fact, this is someone who likes Osama bin Laden. Or they're reposting something about someone who likes Osama bin Laden. You also notice that it is a picture. And so the difficulty you're going to have going forward is that human beings, when they realize that if I post things from Osama bin Laden, I get censored, but if I post them in a picture, I do not, then they will post them in a picture. And then your analysis whole tool chain has to adjust. So here's our analysis tool chain, because we have a working version of Red Alert that we built ourselves with 2 people. The first thing is Python, and that is our scaffolding. The second thing is an extremely large analysis product, which I could not possibly begin to explain right now, but which was originally built to analyze patents and emails and other large data sets, mostly for the legal market. But what it does have is an amazing GUI and the ability to sort of search and drill down, and it's sort of language independent. It has all of the machine learning and analysis and language recognition and entity recognition, and so I can ask it, tell me all the phone numbers in this data set between these particular timelines that have a neural network score of sympathy for bin Laden at above a certain amount. Like, you can do all sorts of things. And the thing that we also did with it was tie everything to the Google APIs, because what we realized very early on is that we were never going to be as good at data science as the Google scientists were. So every document that we get into our engine gets translated, it gets OCR'd. So if there's a picture with Osama bin Laden in it that has a bunch of text, that text gets OCR'd. The OCR'd text then gets translated. So everything in this goes into English. And the other big thing that happens is it becomes image recognized. So if there's a picture of a cat, then the word cat appears in my search terms, and I can say, show me all the pictures of cats in this Twitter data set, whatever it is. So hopefully that whole pipeline makes sense. The other aspect, of course, of a pipeline is your subject matter expert. As I've mentioned before, I'm not a subject matter expert in terrorists. I am a subject matter expert in building these sorts of Death Stars, and I guarantee you my Death Star is fully operational. That's a joke just for me. So, all right. But what it really lets you do is you can do things like show me all the tweets today in Arabic for people who follow a certain person who, where someone talked about Idlib and has a gun in the picture, right? So that level of, or between a certain time, so you can build an arbitrarily complex search set use that search set to train a neural network classifier, have the neural network classifier rank other data sets, and do the whole thing. It's worky, as we say. All right, so what are the problems that everyone runs into in this area? Because I think analyzing the problems and analyzing your solutions at a technical level is necessary to try to project whether or not you're strategically going to use these solutions to actually solve your problems. All right, so I want to say this. Image recognition at scale, so valuable, ridiculously valuable. None of my analysts, by the way, are necessarily linguists, and I think linguists are extremely rare, but also linguists that want to do like an analysis work are pretty rare. And sometimes I'll go into meetings and I'll be like, yeah, man, we found this guy, but he's like, you know, he's speaking in Turkish, but sometimes he speaks in like Farsi, but sometimes he also speaks in Mandarin. And what happens is like the person across the desk is like, yeah, well, I speak all those languages. And I'm like, well, that's great, man, but I had to do this with like 6 interns that I like hired yesterday. So it's all English for me. And so that's an issue you're gonna have everywhere, is how do I scale not just the pipeline, which in this case is horizontally scalable just because brain space is horizontally scalable, but like the workflow, right? So that's super hard because Facebook came out 2 days ago and they were like, we have 15,000 people blocking random images. I'm like, that's nobody, right? Let's say each person can block 1 image a second. You're doing 15,000 images a second. It's nothing. The pipeline is far too big, right? So anyway, image recognition at scale. So let's look at this poor individual, right, who's in a random city in Europe somewhere. Now, yeah, I mean, it becomes very difficult, but the computers, people say artificial intelligence. This is like a pet peeve of mine, when there's really only intelligence. It's like a sign of people's age that they don't understand that the computers are actually smarter than they are. And realistically, we both work the exact same way, just on different hardware. So in any case, computers are better at recognizing images than people are, which is just a fact we're all just gonna have to get used to. And this guy's holding the obvious Taliban flag, and then he says, I think he says, it's too late in, I don't even know what language that is. It could be Arabic. Some of you can read Arabic, I'm sure. And he's wrote Talib, I think in Arabic, or in Arabic characters, in the snow, right? So like, this stuff has to be able to be detected automatically at scale. That's what this system can do. Using my intern, he's an inexpensive but essential part of this project. And so I feel like these are very difficult things to build, and if you haven't built them, you're going to have to. And Google's always going to do it better than you, as this is a lesson that we learned. Again, overdependence on simplistic sentiment analysis. There was a talk early this morning that covered some of the difficulties of this. I feel like it said it in a lot of different words, but I want to show some examples of what we really mean by that. And so if you just look at the Chinese propaganda that was coming out based on the Taiwan effects, at the very top is the pro-Chinese message. At the bottom is the anti-Chinese message. Of course, it's invisibly small, so you might have to contact me later to actually read it. But the problem is a lot of people think that they're going to be doing stuff based on keywords, but in this case, the keywords are almost identical. It's like say no to evil law, and then say no to evil, right? Those are the different, like that's the difference level that the computer can pick out better than you can. And on the right, I have this example from the, now that we have a word for it, racially motivated violent extremism. The FBI has a new hot term, I love it. Anyway, so on the right, there was a Unite the Right was a US-based white nationalist extremist organization that was coming to DC. And what you had was people pretending to be very pro-white nationalist, but directing them to very dangerous areas of DC, to Lodge, for example. So sarcasm, pictographs, multiple languages was mentioned earlier in the same message. These are all problems that are very difficult to solve automatically unless you have decent pipeline infrastructure that can do the neural networks properly. Okay, so someone asked a question this morning during the Red Alert presentation about how to detect a propaganda account. I will say that I've done a lot of analysis of Russian accounts because the United States has helpfully announced which accounts were related to the Internet Research Agency. This here is this pictograph of the shape of communications. This is brain space right here. The shape of communications is super important. Because when you and I talk on Twitter, it's like I talk to you, you talk to me. I talk to you, you talk to me. It's like a little thing, and there's a little group of people, we talk to each other, we're all very friendly. But when bots talk, they tend to want to broadcast their message. That's their job. What you're looking at here is actually an information operation. The middle circle is actually a media personality. All the accounts around it are fake, and they're all broadcasting a message to it. Things like, poor farmers in South Africa, all their land is being taken, right? Like, this stuff works. This is an effective way to do this because, unfortunately, naive politicians and media people think that Twitter people are real for some reason. I think it's because they're old. I gotta be honest. What's on the internet is not real. It's I just wanna hold a magic wand. But anyway, this is what it looks like right here. That's an information operation, and then in dark purple on purple is a sort of a sun star here. This is a Russian propaganda star. Xerxes was pushing out propaganda about Syria. So that's if you're really close, you can see that there's a dot with a bunch of stars around it. So that's kind of what that looks like. These shapes are the only real thing that differentiates propaganda accounts and fake accounts from real accounts. Because now the Russian bots have gotten so good. Their English is perfect. They're not making the Unicode mistakes they used to make anymore. They have pictures that are reasonably like everything about the account, the time they post, the amount they post, everything is completely real, impossible to determine, except how they have to operate because they have to push their message out. They have to look like marketing accounts. So, disintermediation, extremely powerful force, extremely poorly understood. It's one of the things that was covered this morning by an Italian scientist a little bit. And what you end up finding is that in the previous years, I watched some of the old YouTube videos before I came here. In the previous years, one of the comments was that the difference between a terrorist organization and an insurgency is that an insurgency has captured ground that it must defend. And in many cases, terrorist groups on the internet treat an attention space in the cyber domain as ground that they must defend. And that becomes a weakness that we can then exploit. You're going to see them very, very carefully cultivate media. But media in this case does not necessarily mean NBC. It often means a popular blog. And that's something that's been very interesting to watch. Hybrid operations, again, I have a picture here of a Abu Salman Belarus, who's he was running a company called Mahalma Tactical, which was a PMC in Syria supporting Al-Qaeda terrorists or various Al-Qaeda-related groups. Again, I'm not an expert on every terrorist person, but nonetheless, he actually died for the second time, perhaps the final time, recently.
You never know in radical Islam.
You never know. I agree. Yeah, there's no way to say. Yeah. Nonetheless, this picture right here is actually Salman Belarus's contact with media, if you can read it very slowly. And he spoke many, many languages and was one of the more interesting accounts to track at the time. But the way advanced people are using these kinds of tools is, in fact, by doing human cyber ops, information ops, and direct action, right? Like all of these things combined is how you actually get an advanced capability in this space, according to me. So let me show you some mistakes people make, and then I will posit a mistake that everyone here is about to make. You cannot see it necessarily unless you are very, very close, because the screen is a little washed out. But around these two dots is a huge constellation of little dots, the destinations of a Twitter campaign that the Russians ran using the same infrastructure that they used for all of their propaganda running up to the 2016 election. And what this was all Japanese accounts. And what they were doing was they were spamming them with things about health tips that was a redirection to both either a Taiwanese or a Filipino website. Now that Filipino website is running an old IS ASP, which is no longer functioning. But here's what they were probably doing based on my expert opinion, because this is what I'm an expert in, is they were probably targeting a large set of Japanese Twitter accounts for attacking with drive-by downloads and client-side attacks, and potentially other kinds of cyber attacks, using the same infrastructure that they were using for propaganda. I'm good. 2 minutes, I'm in it. I'm in and out. So this is a weakness that people have, is they think, I'm going to have my Twitter campaign that shares SIGINT, this is what I would call SIGINT, and share that with my propaganda and my information operations, and I may share it with my human intelligence. I may share that same infrastructure among a lot of sensitive things. And when you crack one, you crack them all, which is why I built this pipeline. One of my last slides, the IRGC is an extremely sophisticated actor in this exact space of hybrid attacks. They, in addition to doing all of the above, have personas which they run on the internet. This happens to be one of them. When you see something like #OpIsrael, it's very difficult to say that that's not just a direct IRGC campaign that is being sort of laundered through Anonymous, so to speak. And they do know quite a lot about a lot of things in this exact area. They were very ahead of the time. So this is them using Telegram in 2016, before everyone else kind of felt like doing it, with a fake persona, doing very sophisticated, targeted information operations. So the question that I have often for people in the policy community is, how can we confront extremist views in cyberspace without changing anything about our own society and how we operate? And the answer is the same as kind of the one the doctor gives on the right-hand side, which is, you are being crazy, right? So there's things that you have to admit you can no longer do as a nation state. You have to admit that the boundaries of what a Westphalian state are have changed. Until you can admit that, combating some of this stuff in cyberspace is impossible, because the domain has changed things. And as my final point, the hackers get a turn. The hackers get to say, after you say something, the hackers get to move whatever chip on the board they decide to move. And if you are thinking you are going to declare by fiat that Bitcoin is no longer going to be used, then you can try, right? But the hackers get to try again. And that's something that I feel like we have to adjust to very carefully, because most of us are a little bit behind the times. And that's who I am. Those are many of my most annoying thoughts. I have other annoying thoughts. You can read those annoying thoughts on the internet. So thank you so much for your attention.